When we originally did the Mini in 1993 and first showed it at CES in January of '94, it had a very simple stereo system in it. It had a subwoofer amplifier and it had a stereo amplifier to drive a front speaker system. Through really good speaker placement and installation integrity, and through the careful use of arrays, we were able to create a very convincing soundstage in that car with very good imaging. Just had a serious ability to kick ass.
I'm Gary Martin, team leader for the JL build team of the Miniv2. Last year we decided to look at the car. We weren't sure we were going to build it again. We at this time took it down, cleaned it up a little bit, got a little excited about it. We started ordering parts. The first stage in rebuilding this Mini was stripping everything down to the bare bones. The whole car is dynamatted, the roof. We have the tack mat, which we put several layers in the roof and also inside the door panels. We cut out the rear trunk section. The whole floor was cut out in order to accommodate the sliding amp rack. We had to cut out a lot of sheet metal, so we had to build in a framework to hold the enclosure and also to help hold in the amp rack. This was all done out of tubular steel. We also, underneath the car, had to accommodate a battery, so that's on a fold down system, so once the car's jacked up you can fold down the battery. We got a new body kit from England, which was called the Magic Kit. We had to work a lot of magic to fit this kit up on the car. It was very rough shape when we got it. It was a little too wide for the car. We had to do some modifications in the center of the rear section to make it fit the car. Then the kit was bonded to the car. The wheel wells were cut out to accommodate the new wheels that were built for us by Gavin. These are 13-inch spinners, probably the only set in existence at this time, and they were custom made. The hood discussion came around as a result of looking at putting a monitor in the car, and I had to open my big mouth and say something about, oh, we can put a big screen in the hood, and Andy says do it, so we had to perform a miracle. The structural change of the car, in doing this, the front section had to be fiberglass with a line that we liked. The fiberglass hood was fabricated by building a plaster mold from the old hood. We shaped it in the plaster and took a part from that plaster after we had shaped it the way we wanted. We actually used clay before we made the plaster mold to get the shape. The reason we use clay is it's a lot simpler to use than just Bondo, because clay you can work with, change your shapes in 10 times in a day, and if you're doing stuff out of Bondo, you might do it a couple of times, and it's a lot more messy. After we model the shape with clay, we prepare the surface to clay, put plaster on it. And once we do the plaster mold, we take the plaster mold, clean it up, and pull our fiberglass apart from the plaster mold. The front of the car had to be modified because the hood used to open from the rear. We had to put actuators on the front of the hood and in the rear of the hood. The front actuators actually lift the hood up 2 inches, and the rear starts up at the same time as the front, so they work in sequence. In that hood scoop, we decided to integrate the gauges so that they look like they were put there on purpose and it wasn't just something tacked onto the car. The hood is pretty much the center of attraction until you get to the amp rack. When it came to installing the amps in the trunk of this car, we were very limited to space. We looked at many different ways to build an amp rack. We wanted something that was exciting. One of the biggest things we had to do is design this rack that would fit in here with these 3 amplifiers. Very, very little space. So we measured, and we measured, and we measured again. Once we figured out that they would work, then we had to build the amp rack that would do this. That was done out of 1-inch tubular steel. So we used heavy-duty slide brackets, and we had custom-made actuators. There was also the issue of moving the tailgate. We wanted to move the tailgate underneath the car so the amp racks could slide out. Well, this became a whole nother big issue because this car doesn't have very much room under it. Very happy with the way the amp rack turned out. At all the shows, they don't believe it works, first of all, and when you show them, they just give you the thumbs up, laugh, and walk away with a big smile on their face. So it's a big success.
The hardest aspect of the Mini was the enclosures. We kind of wanted to stick with the theme of a ported sealed environment. We had the port built and then built the enclosure around the port. The port had to be 36 inches long. We wanted to do a slot port, but to make this work, we had to make it an S shape. After the testing, we found out it was dead on. The S port actually worked perfectly. The actual mechanism we got from our table saw guard. It's actually a scissor type mechanism, so by doing the scissor, the port went from here to here. So it was no longer an issue, and each port had 2 2-inch actuators to ensure that when it was sealed, that it was sealed.
The enclosure is made out of fiberglass and MDF. We used MDF for the base and for a basic shape. We used the fiberglass to actually custom fit the enclosure into the car. The enclosure itself is separate from all of the trim panels that you actually see in the car. The enclosure looks nothing like the trim panels. The trim panels were all fabricated to fit around the enclosure and the rest of the system once we had it all worked out.
The sound system in this vehicle, to me, what makes it so spectacular is the fact that we went with 5.1. Now, I've never listened to a car a true 5.1 before. And, you know, in the beginning I was kind of skeptical, but it sounds like you're at a concert, especially with the TV right in front of your face. It gives you a total different perspective of what you're listening to. It really enhances the listening pleasure of the vehicle. The dash was constructed, basically we made an armature or a skeleton. A whole bunch of little pieces like ribs just to get a visual shape of what we're looking at. And then we went back to old school with grow cloth, and on top of the grow cloth, fiberglass, and then shape the fiberglass to what you see now. The skeleton that we have in here is not MDF, it's actually the foam material that we use in the floor. Now, once we had the skeleton, we popped the dash out and laid glass in the back, so it is actually 100% fiberglass part. Behind the dash, there's actually a half cubic foot enclosure for the center channel. It was really complicated to do because first we had to get the outside of the dash, then we had to make a mold of the inside of the dash and attach those two fiberglass parts together and then make the enclosure part of the dash. So when you pull the dash apart, the enclosure is attached to the dash. We wanted to add a cooling system because the original Mini didn't have cooling. So we got parts from the Audi TT AC vents on the left and right side. And the center speaker, the design was to keep the speaker itself closest to you as possible with no reflecting edges or anything that can interfere with the sound quality of the vehicle. The kick panels also have a half cubic foot enclosure. The enclosure for the kick panels are actually in the fender well of the vehicle on each side. The kick panel woofer is attached to the kick panel itself. And when you pull the kick panel off, the woofer comes with it. The enclosure is behind the actual kick panel. The seal is in between the kick panel and the enclosure in the fender. All the mid-range woofers in the vehicle are in sealed enclosures. The most difficult ones to build were in the rear because of the location. We had to build an enclosure next to the subwoofer enclosure, which is then funneled through the side of the car up to the rear side pillars where the rear woofers are mounted. The door panels in the car were fabricated by Hector Yanez. If you notice in the new version of the door panel, there's a big padded center, and that's to absorb reflections in the vehicle. The overhead and center console and the bottom center console are both composite. They're two-part foam shaped with a fiberglass bottom and a fiberglass top. The lighting in the vehicle is electroluminescent. It's about as thin as a piece of paper. And what we did, cut 1-inch strips, and as long as you leave a bus bar exposed, you can have basically any shape you want. At CES, I was giving a demo to a dealer in the Mini, and Manville Smith pulls me out, and I see a crowd of people walking down, media and whatnot, and Rob from Car Sound pulled me, Gary, and Manville aside and told us how the demo cars were judged this year. He said it was broken up in three segments. So it's best install, best use of materials, and best sounding vehicle. And then he told us we won 2, and it took a lot to hold back from crying because, like I said before, I didn't expect 1, but to get 2 trophies was a big accomplishment. It made us feel really good that we pull something like that off.
My favorite part of this car is the whole thing. I don't really have a particular part that's my favorite. I enjoyed the whole install, and the guys that I worked with in building this car, it was probably one of the best experiences I've had because I've worked for this company for a long time, and this has been a great project to work on. It brought back a lot of old memories. It was just great to do. So the whole thing, with all the motorization, as hard as it was to do, but it was all worth it.